I'm just a guy that wants to reduce his bills and energy use. I installed solar, some more solar and yet more solar, then a home battery. I've done at least a dozen other things to reduce mine and my home's energy use, cutting my bills to less than a quarter what they were. This channel is about this journey. Insulation or lack of it in the UK is a massive problem. In 2012, the UK under government schemes was insulating over 1.5 million existing homes with either cavity or loft insulation. Despite promising to run the greenest government, Cameron had a change of heart and decided to cut the green crap. The result was slashes to incentives for solar and insulation, and this graph is the result. A collapse to about 5% the number of homes getting subsidised insulation each year. The UK has about 20 million homes, of which most have an EPC of D or worse. It doesn't take a genius to realise we could have insulated most of those in what can only be described as a lost decade. And without subsidies and government intervention, who will insulate the approx 1/3 rented properties in the UK? What's worse, at current gas prices, insulating a loft for say £500 would pay for itself in as little as 1 year. Now summer looks to be definitely over, and a cost of living catastrophe driven by energy bills dominates the winter, causing massive financial pain and worse to millions. I thought I would show what steps I have taken since buying this house 7 years ago to super-insulate it and manage its energy use. Maybe it's that I believe in peak oil, but I kind of knew one day energy prices would rocket. I just didn't expect it to happen this quickly. In other videos I've covered my solar install, and this graph from Octopus app shows how low my electricity use is from spring to autumn, averaging a remarkable 1 kWh a day versus the approx 20 for a house this size. While especially with an electric car my house uses a lot more in winter, the battery system means we can buy the electricity for that day at off-peak prices, paying only 1/5 of the peak price. But super-insulating this house and a few other projects has made a vast difference to my gas use too, reducing it to a figure less than 1/6 what this house would have used before. Simply using spare PV energy to heat hot water for 7 or so months a year has cut my gas water heating by half, but space heating is said to be 2/3 of a gas bill, and I hope this video shows how I tackled this and gives you ideas for your own home. One strange, probably unusual idea I thought of to preserve heat energy in the house was to capture the waste heat from the outflow of the dishwasher. Dishwashers spend more than 1 kWh each cycle just heating water, then flush it away, wasting that heat. I thought if I simply make a very long water trap, I can keep a few litres of this before the next one pushes that now cold water down the pipe, thus making a continuous radiator each time I run it. Note the sink waste, which could be cold or hot, joins the pipe afterwards, so not affecting this. In May this year, this house's old gas boiler had to be replaced. Because we do our spring to autumn hot water heating on solar, it at least was not something that was so urgent. One of the people I play football with is a plumber. He even let me pick my own boiler and after parts, and as labour it came to about £1,500. Now maybe I should have looked more seriously at a heat pump, but at the moment, for me, the costs don't work. Like an air conditioner, in heating mode, a heat pump is so efficient that 1 kWh of electricity gives you from 3 to 5 kWh of heat. But if the electricity is 3 times the price, where is the saving on running cost? Heat pump systems also cost from about £8,000, minus the £5,000 government grant, and that's a £3,000 versus £1,500 for a boiler swap. Environmentally, the UK grid is about 30 to 50% gas, worse in winter when heating demand is higher and the sun doesn't shine, and worse when we get the rare -10°C beast from the east cold snap, where the wind might fail for days. I will say if you have a gas boiler and it does not have a plastic tube coming out the bottom, it means it's not a condensing boiler and is likely only about 70% efficient. A condensing one can be from 85 to 95% efficient and will save a typical house over £500 a year at current gas prices. So I grew up in a house like this, a nice big detached house, but these chalet bungalows are a good example of poorly insulated post-war housing. Some of the years I spent living in a bedroom in the dormer bit that sticks out and some in one of the end bedrooms under the eaves. They had one thing in common: they were freezing in winter and boiling hot in summer. The room in the eaves had nothing between the black felt under the tiles and the plasterboard of the room, and I'm pretty sure there was nothing or minimal insulation in the dormer walls and roof. But these were built in the early 1970s. The UK had discovered our own oil and gas in the North Sea, and heating and energy was cheap. Maybe this is one of the reasons that when we bought this house I wanted to make it super insulated. Okay, there's a limit to what you can do to a house like we bought, but I was going to do all I could and have found a good dozen ways to reduce our electricity and gas bill to maybe 20% what it would be normally. Don't believe me? Here's my gas bill. It helped, of course, that I fixed it for 2 years last November at what seemed like a very high price, 5p a kilowatt hour. But that looks like a massive bargain now, given that prices are expected to go above 20p a kilowatt hour. So as per my prior videos, solar, yet more solar, and a home battery and increasing battery expansion has taken care of the electricity. LED lighting has helped too. Using solar to heat hot water has reduced our spring to autumn gas usage to almost zero. In fact, for the last 3 months of this year, we've used only 4 units of gas. Now for heating and insulation. Everyone should know that insulating a loft these days is a no-brainer, but the loft hatch in every house I've seen is a crappy bit of plywood. Seeing this as poorly insulated, I stuck a bit of celotex to the back of it. Now it's as well insulated as the rest of the ceiling. In our previous house we had a beautiful expensive wood burner fitted into the chimney which we got to enjoy for only a few more years before buying this house. But unlike many houses on our street, this house did not have a chimney. So as a side project to other building work, our builder built us a big fireplace opening and a chimney up to 5 foot high to the side of the house. To this we had a wood burner installed and a black flue pipe fitted up to the roof. Perfect solution to the heating problem, you would think. In fact, no. After 2 years I realised that having a uninsulated metal box with a big uninsulated pipe to the outside is like having an open door larder in what was already a cold, north-facing room. After 3 years I came up with 2 solutions. 1. Insulate above the metal register plate with this special stove fireproof insulation. And 2. Make a plug for the stove. I realised that probably 90% of the time the stove is not in use, so salvaging a half sheet of celotex from a neighbour's skip, some plywood from B&Q, some carpet cut-offs, and some scrap timbers, I made a super-insulated box that was a snug fit to the hole. 2 giant screws allow this wood plug to be removed easily. A good kick with the foot and it's a snug fit again. Now, this is not going to work for everyone and is going to sound ridiculous to many, but air conditioners make for a fantastically cheap heater. Heat pumps have been in the news a lot for a good reason. 1 kilowatt of electricity can provide 3 to 5 kilowatts of heat. It sounds like it breaks the laws of thermodynamics, but it simply cheats them by moving heat from the outside to the inside with fans and refrigeration gases. An air conditioner is the same as a heat pump, but it's an air-to-air heater. It's not heating the radiators or your hot water. When you have solar panels on a cold spring day generating 1 kilowatt of free solar energy and the kitchen is cold, we can turn on this AC in heat mode and that 1 kilowatt of solar becomes a powerful 4 kilowatt electric heater that pumps out a wave of hot air in seconds. This helps reduce our gas usage further. When we bought this house we had the double-length garage converted into a utility room and bigger kitchen. But the floor levels did not allow for much underfloor insulation. The big 3.6 metre wide bifold doors wasn't going to make the room feel very much warmer either. The building inspector kindly did not ask us to spend thousands digging out the garage floor, but instead was happy when I said I would super-insulate the long wall with 40mm celotex. While researching insulation I came across something called polystyrene backed plasterboard. Simply a 2.4 metre sheet of 9.5mm plasterboard glued to a 21mm or thicker sheet of polystyrene, and unlike celotex it was only £15 a sheet. In the utility room I watched my builder fit one of these to a wall in only a few minutes. He simply got his can of expanding foam, made a lot of tiny lines of foam on the back of the sheet and pressed it to the wall. He then used some special screw-like nails called hammer fixings to further secure it to the wall. Now most plasterers fitting plasterboard will use a technique called dot dab. They get a sheet of plasterboard, Slap about 15 pie-sized blobs of sloppy plaster mix on the back of the sheet and press it hard up against a wall. I've now copied my builder's technique in probably a dozen rooms in my house, where instead of just decorating an external wall, I now rip and chisel off the old plasterboard and fit this polystyrene back plasterboard. And the difference is amazing. Another advantage of taking off the old plasterboard is that I expose these Catnic branded box lintels above every window. These giant metal square box tubes are superbly strong but have zero insulation ability. About 10 years later, building standards require these to be manufactured with polystyrene injected into them, but not in 1981 when this house was built. So cold air from cavities and the outside flows through them, around other gaps in the blockwork, around the windows and in behind the plasterboard, in the 1 to 3 centimetre gaps left by the dot dab process I mentioned earlier. You have literal cold air flowing behind all your plasterboard. It's ridiculous. Let me take you through a case study, insulating my daughter's bedroom. Being on the corner of the house, it has 2 exterior walls, so a bad start. Further, these walls face northeast and northwest, the 2 coldest sides of any house in the northern hemisphere, getting little sun in the winter. Whether we tucked in the curtains or not, turned up the radiator, this room always lost heat quickly. I'm sure most of you have rooms like this in your houses. So I smashed off the plasterboard starting near the window. As was typical, I found big gaps around the window and no expanding foam. Speaking to the window fitters at the time, I recall they don't believe in it. Said it can bow the plastic frames of the windows. Well, this is true if you're really stupid with it. Expanding foam does what its name suggests. It expands. If applied too generously, it can warp a plastic window frame. So instead they fit the window with 3 screws per side, none at the top or bottom, then silicone the window in place. You have a nice, white, super-insulated plastic window. What do they care if you have no nice insulating foam stopping the drafts coming around the sides? One thing you spot when you remove the plasterboard in a house like this is a tiny wooden batten wired in place along the middle of the lintel as seen in this photo. God knows what it's for, it's so small and rubbish and I pull it off. Taking the house back to this bare state means I can put a decent piece of wood in the face of the lintel and hammer it in place, and you'll be able to make a good screw fixing into it when it comes to fitting blinds or curtains. Smashing off more plasterboard, I found gaps in the blockwork left by the lazy builders, and I could feel the draft coming through them. These I filled with expanding foam. Far worse was to be revealed when I got under the windowsill. I found a 6 centimetre tall gap where they hadn't bothered to build the internal wall. They had these finely giant P-shaped bits of metal nailed to the blockwork, and these and the actual plasterboard was all that was supporting the front of the windowsill. The wind was blowing through them from underneath the windowsill. The cavity was empty. It seems when we'd had cavity wall insulation fitted, they had not done it to the upstairs front of the house because it had wall tiles on it. The insulators can't drill through these and inject the insulation material. I remembered I had some polystyrene insulation packaging in the garage. Coincidentally, they were a perfect fit to go under most of the windowsill. Between them I filled the gaps with foam, and it was now super insulated and not open to the cavity behind. And of course, above the window was another totally hollow Catnic steel box lintel filled with hundreds of holes that the wind blew through. It took about 3 cans of expanding foam to fill this lintel. As I took off more plasterboard, I noticed the wall was not at all vertical. There was practically nothing at the top of the wall and 4 centimetres of dot dab next to the window. But using some scrap polystyrene, I built out the wall to make it level in the middle and cut some off at the very top. My wall would now be a bit more vertical and be even better insulated in the middle. Above the Catnic lintel in the top course of bricks was the wooden roof plate. Above this was a 1 centimetre gap and probably the roof beyond, and of course no insulation. The floorboards, they didn't go all the way to the walls. I filled this gap with foam too. At the side of the room where the internal stud wall met the external wall, there were huge gaps, and you guessed it, I applied more foam. So far, I'd used about 8 cans of foam and I hadn't even got to fitting the polystyrene bagged plasterboard. I'd read expanding foam sticks better to a slightly damp surface and needs moisture in the air to cure. I found wetting the block wall slightly with an old paint roller before applying the expanding foam-backed PVP is a good idea. Simply put about 10 to 15 thin, roughly thumb thickness lines of foam on the sheet, then press it to the wall and wobble it around on the wall a few centimetres. This will break the large lumps of foam and make a flat area of airy, lumpy goo a few millimetres thick. A perfect thermal break from the wall. Then you need two things to hand very quickly. A drill with a damn good concrete grade drill bit, like one made by Heller, and about 15 nylon hammer fixings. One's about 6 centimetres by 6 millimetres. The plan is, with the sheet already stuck to the wall, you're going to try and drill through the plasterboard and the blockwork behind it, then hammer in the nylon fixings. To the sides of the window, the blockwork is often pretty far off vertical and space is tight. You will want to use thinner bits of polystyrene back plasterboard and really pay attention to making them square and vertical. And given they're small pieces, you can keep presenting them and checking with the spirit level. You'll want to do the two sides and one for under the lintel at the same time, making sure the underside of the lintel one sits on the two side pieces to help hold them all in place. Fill in all the small gaps around the window with more foam, and be a bit more generous with the foam as to hold all three pieces of plasterboard in place. You're going to need some wooden props too. 3 stout pieces that won't bend and lots of thinner bits in between the windowsill and lintel to jam them in place like in this photo. If you had radiator pipes coming out the wall or floor under the window, obviously be careful to not damage them while chiselling off the old dab cement. I try and bend them away from the wall a bit, but sadly they're very liable to kinking when bent, as I found out. When in one bedroom afterwards I found there was only a tiny bit of heat from a radiator, me and a plumber friend traced it back to a kinked 8mm micro-bore pipe. I then had to rebuild the wall and skirting board as per these photos. What you should end up with is a super-insulated wall and window edge that has no air gaps. With the PVP stuck close to the walls and sealed with millions of air bubbles, no wind will move behind your plasterboard. No plasterboard is even touching the block wall. A perfect gap like a vacuum flask. The result is amazing. Where before I could hear the wind around the window frame and the plasterboard was cold and damp to the touch, now there's none of that. The plasterboard is warm to the touch. The room loses temperature ever so slowly, even when freezing outside. The heating can be off at night without the room getting cold, staying above 15 degrees Celsius for the whole night, even when the heating had only been turned up to 18 in the first place, not dropping to 10 degrees or below like before. We keep one fan light open a crack even in winter, and after 2 winters there's no sign of damp or mildew. I found that being so well insulated the radiator can be smaller than before, and just 10 minutes of heating every 6 hours or so and the room is fine and comfortable. My study unfortunately only had a plastered wall, not a plasterboarded wall, so in this room I simply stuck sheets of the polystyrene back plasterboard to the wall. Again, instead of being cold to the touch, the wall is now warm to the touch. For the lounge, I took advantage of removing the plasterboard to hide some cables in the wall. I chiselled out a small gap to fit a narrow pipe behind the plasterboard for HDMI cables to the TV. I also ran the speaker wire behind the plasterboard and replaced plywood boxing around a soil stack with insulation and soundproof plasterboard. Having some home cinema speakers and with my daughter's bedroom above, I also attempted to super-insulate the ceiling space. I filled the ceiling void with soundproof insulation normally used for between stud walls, and instead of thin 9mm ceiling plasterboard, I used 15mm soundproof plasterboard. And between it and the joist I staple gunned carpet underlay in the hope it would make a sound barrier. When it came time to do my younger daughter's room, I had lots of leftover pieces of the polystyrene plasterboard left. Using small pieces just meant I had to be more careful with the hammer fixings, foam gaps between the sheets, and use lots of plaster tape when it came to plastering. I had picked up a few tips from watching the plasterers, and, given the small size of this wall, would take on small plastering jobs like this myself now. Any big walls or ceilings I would definitely leave to the professionals. Due to an extension being performed 30 years ago, this room is no longer on the corner of the house, but sandwiched between 2 other rooms. Knowing with the polystyrene and lintel being filled the room would be maybe 3 times better insulated than before, I shrunk the radiator size by about half. Amazingly, this tiny radiator keeps this room perfectly warm and gives us more wall space. I probably spent only £100 doing this room. The radiator cost £20, the plaster bag, an edge bead round the window less than £10, £5 on hammer fixings, £20 on foam, and £60 to a plumber to put back the radiator as part of a larger job. In the master bedroom, I chickened out of doing the long 5-metre wall and just did the wall around the window, knowing the hollow catnick lintel and gaps round the window would be the major cause of heat loss in the room. Search on eBay and the DIY stores, and when buying a dozen cans you can often get them as cheap as £5 each or less.